This podcast contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk or call back after you've watched the movie.
You know who you call. Leave a message. Maybe they'll call you back. Then again, maybe they won't.
We're having ourselves quite a little game of phone tag here.
Ring, ring, ring. I usually get this guy's answering machine.
I'll call you right back.
If you're there, please pick up the phone. I really want to talk to you.
I check my fucking messages every day when I come home from work. My answering machine, zero. I got a blinking light.
All I have to do is pick up this phone right here, inform the cinema, and your plan's kaput.
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions.
Hey man, just fucking made it through the hour and a half that is the coffee table. Yeah, it's Friday night, fun Friday night movie. Just thought I'd just send you a message straight away because it's kind of one of these intense movies that the experience of watching it, kind of the immediate experience of watching it is so potent that I think if I send you a message in like a day or two's time, it would be a very different emotional feeling. I heard about this movie maybe 6 months or a year ago, I guess, when it first hit the festival circuit. I think whenever a film comes out that's like supposed to be really extreme, it gets sort of talked about. It sort of spreads through the horror community and the sort of film nerddom. I remember films like Irreversible or a Serbian film or Human Centipede kind of like getting a lot more famous than a film of that budget or of that kind of origin would normally get, just because it has this mystique associated with it of like, have you seen it? Would you watch it? What was it like? All that kind of thing. And this is sort of the latest film to get that kind of dangerous association. So I think probably the people who've had the purest interaction with the film are people who just watched it not really knowing anything about it, never heard of it, just watching a movie. For me, I used to approach that kind of content with relish. I guess like right from the beginning of first ever watching movies and seeing like the things that initially scared you. I remember, being scared by Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs when I was a kid, when the Queen turns into the evil witch, and then later on things like Scream 2, and then as you get older, then into like Martyrs and really extreme stuff. But it's always been sort of like that you sort of chasing the dragon of that feeling of, holy shit, this is more extreme than anything I've ever seen before. But now I'm pushing 40 now. I think I'm getting a little bit softer and I have a bit more dread, but still that sort of morbid curiosity that forces me to check out these movies. But it's not like, as I'm not approaching it with zeal, I'm more approaching it like, I kind of have to watch this because otherwise I'll just be eternally curious about it. But how's this going to go? And then the movie opens like within 10 seconds of the movie, you've got a baby's head in shot. And I'm like, okay, all right. So that's what's going on here. I knew it was an extreme movie, and I knew it was about a singular incident. I think I'd acquired that knowledge from Reddit, and I knew it was called The Coffee Table. So I kind of put those things together and anticipated that it was going to be some sort of physical accident involving a coffee table. And I think pretty much straight away in the film, you learn that it's a glass coffee table. And it's like, okay, I kind of know where we're going here. I have a baby, 2-month-old. I also have a toddler who's just about to turn 3. So I guess for almost 4 years now, I've been living in constant fear of, not constant fear, that's an exaggeration, but I've been living in recurring fear of A, physical harm happening to my children, and B, me causing physical harm to my children. You know, like, I think before my first daughter was born, I was like, but I've never been responsible for anything before. Like, the most precious thing I've ever had is like a smartphone or something, and I've been dropping those and smashing them up. So I'm not going to be able to look after a baby. I'll be walking, I'll be carrying it, and I'll turn around a corner, I'll smack its head against a door frame or something, because I just, like, how could I always be perfect every single second of every day? I might be good, I might be perfect 98% of the time, but I'm going to mess up occasionally, and then it's like a precious little fragile baby that I'm messing up with. And I think a lot of people have this anxiety going into becoming a parent, and then it ultimately works out all right, and they don't they don't mess up. And of course, you mess up in the sense that, like, you hurt your baby when you're cutting its nails, and you accidentally nick a bit of its skin, and little things like that. You end up hurting your baby. But these kind of, like, the things that go through your head, I mean, like, it's horrible to even talk about it, but I've certainly imagined the worst stuff happening at my hands accidentally to my kids. And so this film taps into a fear that I've spent years ruminating on, and I think a lot of people have. There's a very surface level fear to that, of like, I killed my baby, or I mutilated my baby, this, that, and the other. But then there's the sort of underlying, the subconscious aspect to it of, like, I let my family down, like, that's kind of the Freudian subcurrent to it, or undercurrent to it, where, well, what you're really afraid of, what you're really worried about, is your role as a father, as a provider, as a, I guess, as everything that you're supposed to be, and that hurting your baby is like the most dramatic manifestation or representation of that. But I think this film really, really, really effectively taps into this feeling of inadequacy that a lot of people have. I think I can sort of say, for this film, it's focusing particularly on that fathers and husbands and men have, but I think that could equally have made this film where it was the woman that messed up, and like, this is not these anxieties are not unique to men at all. But of course, I am a man, and the guy that messes up in this movie is a man, and so it's like, I mean, he doesn't even really mess up. It's an accident. I mean, we don't actually see if he was being reckless in the way he was walking, or I think it's quite smartly held off camera, because I think if you put it on camera, the blocking and exact choreography that would be required to create the specific lack of responsibility or actual responsibility that the screenwriter or the director are going for will be very hard to pull off. So if you just leave it ambiguous, and I think the impression I get from this film is that it was just a very unfortunate accident and it wasn't his fault, but his position as a father, and whether he's equipped to be a father, wants to be a father, that's already come under attack several times up to that point. And yeah, that's more interesting content. I mean, this film is so interesting. I think I could talk about this film for a very long time, perhaps too late at night for me now to collect my thoughts in an efficient way, but hopefully our back and forth conversation will drag out some more thematic concepts in it. Like, just on the subject of fatherhood here, we've got a character who we know didn't want to have kids and was sort of bullied into it, or certainly convinced. It was a bit of a hard sell. And I know so many guys who have children and they sort of argued against that at great length and eventually relented because they, loved their partner and really wanted to give their partner that thing that their partner really craved. And, these people, like the character in this film, adore their children and are happy that they have a child, but they're also like, they've made a massive sacrifice, and there's other things that are still important to them in life. And that's really, really interesting territory to be exploring, I think. And it's great that we don't get to see that baby's bedroom until very late in the film, because when you see it and you realize how much love he has and how much he cares about giving his baby like this magical childhood, it's a nice revelation, I think, in the face of some of the other things we know about how involved he's been in this whole decision and making this whole transition in their lives and everything like that. My thoughts are all over the place because this is such a intense movie. Like I said, I knew it was going to be an intense one going in, and then I knew from 10 seconds into it that it was probably going to involve a baby, the intensity. I did assume that it was going to be a gory film. It's not really. I mean, of course it is a gory film by the standards of just films in general, but I thought it was going to be more like Martyrs or something, where it's legitimately like horrific imagery. Yes, there is horrific imagery in this film, but it's as tastefully done as you could possibly do it, I think, given what's actually happened in the film. They let it play out in your brain, which is, potentially worse. But what the film actually focuses on is the aftermath and the period between when he's killed his baby, if that's the correct terminology. Certainly the baby has died in an accident with his involvement. So it's the period between that and it being revealed to the wife. And I find that really interesting as well. We see all the time, like if you ever like hear about like true crime or anything like that, it's always like the person killed his whole family, and then when the police showed up or when the neighbors showed up, or he was just sat there having a dinner or something, and it's that kind of little last period of normal banal life that people often go to between having done something that's like you can never go back from that. You're going to spend the whole rest of your life in prison, or you're going to kill yourself, or whatever it is. And then that pocket of time is quite fascinating. This is very thematically consistent. My daughter's now waking up, watching her on the baby monitor, so I might have to head up, comfort her, while this fucking movie is bouncing around in my brain, and then hopefully come down and add more to it. But let's see if she fully wakes up. That pocket of time, which is like maybe the extent to which it's dragged out in this film, with him so many times being able to prevent her from going into the room and check on the baby. Maybe that's a little contrived and a little unrealistic, but the general concept of it, of like someone does something and they just want it to not be true for a little while or for as long as possible. So they switch into this role play, surreal kind of mode where they try to kind of go back. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. And then eventually it will be revealed and it's the game's up and then all the consequences happen. But I've seen that in movies, but I've never seen that be a whole movie. And it's such an interesting period of time that, like I said, happens all the time in real life, but we never really see it explored in great detail in movies. I think a lot of time we get these people who are in movies and in real life, but in movies particularly, we get people who they had a sort of psychological break when they did something, like they either accidentally or deliberately did something bad, and then they just sort of blocked it out from their brain and they switched into denial mode, and they're in a mental institution and they don't know that they killed their husband or whatever it might be. But this is more like he knows hasn't gone crazy. He doesn't think that he didn't do it or something, but he just wants the last few minutes of his life that are just normal life, because once those final dying minutes play out, that's it. Like his life's over, his wife's life is over. It's a done deal. So I didn't know that was going to be the movie, and that's interesting. And that is very excruciating. Of course, there's elements of dark comedy in this, and it's I didn't ever laugh in the movie, but there's enough of a sort of sadistic, pitch black comedy absurdity to it that it keeps it from being the heaviest that it could possibly be. I mean, I'm imagining like a Lars von Trier version of this. Antichrist has sort of similar subject matter in a way, and Lars von Trier would have made this film like you can't, like, I wouldn't even be sending you this voice message right now because I'd be like catatonic and I'd need like 2 days to recover from it. This does enough movie-ish kind of absurdity to make you be able to go, it's just only a movie kind of thing, which is kind of appreciated here, although it undercuts the intensity of the film, which is kind of the main reason why it's gone viral and all that. But it is it's helpful in being able to detach from the film, and that like even the staging of the final bit where the girl comes in, the 13-year-old girl, to make her accusation. He's not only going to have to walk into the room and tell her about the baby, but when he walks into the room, she's just been told this, what we're assuming is a lie, that he kissed this girl in the elevator, and then the dog runs off, and which is again sort of comedic, but also like realistic and horrible, that it's just so out of his hands at the end. Yeah, I'm glad that I've seen this film. I think it's a good film. I think in the opening scene, I was like, okay, this is too comedic. This is the opening scene. I'm not talking about the little brief moment of the baby being born, but the salesman scene. I felt like this is a bit too camp. It's a bit too sketch comedy-ish, that I don't know how intense this movie could ever get. But it's ultimately a decent enough scene, and I think once we move past that and we dig into the bitterness and the resentment in the relationship, and this, I guess that scene is quite one note. You got the husband, you got the wife, you got this sort of combative nature between them. But when the husband has to, explore all of the different territory he has to navigate in this film, and then the wife has to respond to that really naturalistically, it occurs to you over time that they're both fantastic actors, and they both just, I think all the actors in the film are actually really good. Some of them have more interesting parts than others, but the two leads just, they're always ratcheting up the tension or making it more excruciating with their little reactions, and they're just, in her case, her kind of like sometimes being thrown off the scent, and then sometimes like clocking things about him and becoming upset and stuff. And then in his case, just that feeling of there's joviality going on around, there's banter, it's good times, everyone's happy and stuff like that. I have to kind of play along with that, but I'm actually going through the fucking worst situation imaginable. He plays that so well. And not that I have experience of that situation, but I think we all have experience of like, I'm internally on such a different emotional wavelength than the ambience of what's going on around here. And to an extent, I can kind of like to nod my head and go along with it. But if you put me on the spot, like, you're going to see the cracks in the veneer. And yeah, he does that really well. And I think there's so much good stuff in this film that I don't mind some of the, I wouldn't even say imperfections, because it's like, it's not specific complaints, but it's just more like, because the film is sometimes camp, it's just sometimes a lesser, it's got like two types of film that it's trying to be in a way, and they do complement each other, but I prefer one to the other. I prefer the realistic, psychological, in like super dark study than the more camp, heightened black comedy thing. But I also, as I said, kind of appreciated the relief that I got from when it goes a little bit more humorous. And again, I never laughed or never found it funny, but is going, okay, all right, I can see the sadistic smile of the director here, and that's kind of making me take it more as a movie rather than just being like completely immersed in the character experience. Now, if it didn't have any of that and it was just like pure, like just 100% pitch, like dark, no comedy, just like the devastating reality of what the situation would be like, then could it have been a better movie? Maybe. Would I don't know how I'd feel about it, to be honest. I might be in awe of it and go, it's a masterpiece, but I also might just be so just have hated watching the movie so much that I wouldn't have much positive sentiment to say about it. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's also hard to just break down and analyze this film because it's so potent. I probably for all audiences, but certainly as a father, it is, I mean, like, I am a father, I'm a husband, I'm a man, I'm probably a similar age, like, I even down to things like, I'm sure this happens in all relationships, but like me and my wife have had like plenty of debates about interior design and stuff like that. Like, there's so much in this movie that is like a very well considered and pointed exploration of very, very real and relatable themes. It's like pretty much no one has accidentally chopped their baby's head off with a coffee table, but billions of people have been through the material in this film, some of it, probably a lot of it. And so I wasn't expecting one of these like extreme films to actually have anything kind of close to home. You know, when you watch a Serbian film or you watch Irreversible or something like that, it's like, yeah, of course there are some things where you're like, but you know, it's not like about aliens, or it's not some sort of like surreal Andy Warhol film that doesn't have any humans in it or something. It is somewhat real and tangible, but for the most part, it's like, this has got nothing to do with me. But this film, yeah, it's a tough one. It's, as I said, it is a direct adaptation of fears that I've had for fucking ages, for years. And even watching it, I was like, am I going to be comfortable carrying my son around tomorrow? Because what if I trip or something? But you know, it's your brain gets quite irrational when you've got a literal life in your hands, and it's like a fragile life, especially when they're newborn, and it's like their skull is so fragile and everything. Now he's 2 months old, he's a bit more robust, but certainly he's, you know, can't fend for himself yet. But yeah, I'm yeah, like I could probably, after you've sent a voice note back, I can get into like more of the like, I can get into the filmmaking a bit more, the supporting actors, the way things spread out and stuff. But I just kind of wanted to send you this voice message on like the raw feeling of it. And yeah, I knew it was going to be an extreme experience. Sometimes that means that it's not that extreme, because you're like, what, is that all you got? I thought you were supposed to be the big extreme movie. Like that can be a reception that one has to these like movies that become famous specifically because they're hard to watch. And then when we get that shot in the sort of hallway of the apartment, he's pacing back and forth with the baby, and the shot's lingering there, and it's very slowly creeping in. I'm like, okay, this is it. Like, this is game time. The way this is being set up and played out, like he is about to kill his baby with the coffee table. It's almost like Final Destination, the way things are being set up with the missing screw and the wobbly glass and the glass being tilted upright and this, that, and the other. So you know what's going to happen, or at least you know if you know it's like a famously fucked up movie or whatever. But then after that happened, I was like, we've got like over an hour left of this movie, and I've already seen the big, bad, terrible thing. So is this going to be boring? And I was like, well, I could handle that, no problem, because I can go, look, it's not real, it's just a baby, whatever. Like, you know, it's not just a baby, but it's just a prop. It's a prosthetic. And I'm like, okay, well, that wasn't too bad. But then the thing that actually makes this movie incredibly soul destroying is watching him squirm and watching someone who's dying or beyond dead inside just sitting with the worst thing. You know, it's always like, I think, like, I mean, I would say pretty much all parents would say that they would much rather they die than their kid die. And if you die, it's like, I'm done, I'm out, you know. But if your child dies and you have to live with that, it would just be like, it's almost like, as I stand right now, I can't even imagine how one could live with that. Like, it's like, it's not even in my like almost 40 years of emotional experience. I don't have like on my map anything that tells me that that's a livable life kind of thing. I mean, I know people do live past that, and it's like, it's just personally, I find it very hard to conceive of how I could experience joy again and see value in life and all that kind of stuff. So just the fact that the majority of this film is watching someone, and he doesn't ever say it out loud, but you can see it in his eyes, and you see it in his brilliant acting. You can see that he's meditating on that feeling, and the feeling that he's killed his baby, he's essentially killed his wife, he's killed his whole world, and he sat there in that agonizingly. Like I said, I've seen these extreme movies like Ichi the Killer and stuff, which are like really gory and really violent and stuff like that. But this one, it's all psychology. It again reminds me of Lars von Trier, reminds me of films like Breaking the Waves, Dancer in the Dark, Dogville. Those films are incredibly hard to watch. They're like devastating, soul destroying, so punishing, but it's because of psychological and social situations. Yes, horrifically bad stuff happens, like physically happens, but it's the devastation to a personhood that brings about that is the difficult to watch material in those movies. It's not the act. In this film, you don't see the act, it happens off screen. I think that's actually brilliant because it goes, we're not going to use that as one of the reasons why this film is hard to watch. This film is going to be hard to watch completely off of the acting and the concept. Because even though you, like I said, you do see like sort of blurry shots of the baby's head and stuff, really you don't see much gore in this film. The thing that makes it difficult viewing is how seriously it depicts that journey. It's not even a journey, it's like he's in one state essentially for the whole rest of the movie. Anyway, I'm waffling here because I'm very much unrecovered from this film, and I've recommended that you watch it. I haven't told you anything about it, but you've got your ear to the ground, so I wouldn't be surprised if you already know what it's about. I'm hoping you don't, because then at least one of us will have watched it, like not even knowing it was an extreme movie, just like watching a movie. Although maybe you'll never forgive me for inflicting that on you if you get out the popcorn and throw it on like after the football on a Sunday afternoon or something. Anyway, let me know what you thought of this film, and yeah, hopefully next time I speak on it I'm a little more collected and a little clearer in my thoughts. But yeah, I like this. I was going to say I like this movie. I can't actually say that sentence because it just doesn't feel right in my mouth, but I highly, highly admire this film.
Jesus. Yeah. That's how I'm gonna open my fucking message to you, buddy. So I had guests coming over today on the Sunday, and normally I keep my Sundays to myself, but that's fine. So I put on this movie 9:30 in the morning, straight after getting up, just to get it out of the way before they came. And I still feel anxious, and I don't know, and it didn't help when the guests came over, who I very much like a lot, but they had a morbid conversation as well about death and people dying. So even though it's 5:49 now, I'm in a a state of anxiety that hasn't stopped since watching that movie at 9:30 and it finishing something like 11 a.m. And that sense of anxiety and dread has not left me. Now my day and what's gone on in other ways has contributed to it, but I sincerely doubt that I would ever have a morsel of that feeling, because I normally don't have that feeling, had I not watched this movie today. So I remember you mentioning the coffee table to me before, about 6 months ago maybe, and I downloaded it. And I think you said something along the lines of, oh, we should watch this movie and find nothing about it. But you did mention that it's extreme. So somehow that still stayed in my head, but I wasn't quite sure. And then I think when I downloaded it, I had seen that it was a horror/comedy. So boy, did I think I was in for a good time. But then I remember you said it was extreme, but certain people think things are extreme and they're not at all. So you can never really figure out what one person's extreme movie is and another person's Gone with the Wind. So I had all these thoughts going into it, and then the opening scene kind of threw me off guard a bit with the coffee table. Not so much the opening scene of the woman giving birth, which I had completely forgotten about, but the scene of them at the coffee table in the store debating about the logistics and the aesthetic and whether she should get the coffee table, and the salesman pitch, which is, again, with all these things swirling around my head, I was thinking, is this going to be a magic coffee table? Because the scene, as you rightly said, is a little bit, not to say wacky, because I was thinking, okay, we're going to get the Spanish puffy chair here. We're going to get a horror where they fall out over this coffee table and maybe the wife ends up killing him. So I had no idea what exactly we're going to get. And it's not that the scene was camp. I didn't really think that, but I thought they were a little bit too smug here with their dialogue. They're a little bit too smug here. But at the same time, I thought that the scene itself was quite good at showing the dynamics between the characters themselves. The fact that he's compromised and he's a little bit younger, he's wanting to exert his authority and autonomy and space in his own life in the house and trying to have something that's individual, and he feels like he's made a lot of sacrifices for his wife. I think a lot of things come out in that conversation. So it is nice to see these characters in a moment of non-stress are bickering about as a couple normally would in these situations, to just get a little bit of an insight into what the characters are like in general. And maybe the scene might be a little bit too smug with its back and forth. I think at the same time it does a good job. I was on board, but I was also thinking, oh, we're going to get the puffy chair, the horror puffy chair, which of course, as you know, it's one of the movies we really like, where a lot of conflict is brought about by a puffy chair. So I thought, okay, maybe we'll get a horror version of that. This coffee table is going to be the focal point of a lot of things in this movie. Boy, was I wrong. And then obviously we get the build up with, oh, the screw's missing, and then a few things like that start unfolding, and I'm still wondering, okay, what's going to happen here? What, can't really figure it out, but I know I've been told a few things just by verbiage of words like extreme, horror, comedy. Where are we going here? And I remember you saying this is quite extreme, and then it dawned on me, are we going to see a a baby die here? I had the same thought when he's left in the flat by himself in the profit chair. The coffee table and the baby. You're thinking, this is almost set up like Final Destination. I agree with you that you just feel something. You feel a state of doom that's going to happen. And you made a very good point that I forgot about. This is a movie that's it's very raw and emotional how I've absorbed this movie. Few new fears unlocked. So a few things you actually said that I had forgot that happened. It is a very good decision that we don't actually get to see it. That's a very good point, because some of the best things that we get, we let our own imagination run wild, and we could dissect things to the point of distraction from the movie if we were stuck on that. I think me and you might even have a 55-minute conversation on whether he was to blame for dropping the baby in the sense that he did or not. I think it's very smart. I also think, and I could be wrong completely, but that this movie is quite low budget. So I think it was also a budget reason. Now, I could completely be wrong on that, but I did get the feeling that that was the reason initially why we didn't see it. But you're completely right. It frees up a lot of the conversation and imagination to things we didn't see. The other thing is that when we hear about stories like this that are really messed up and whatnot, we have never witnessed the event ourselves. So how we can do this, that wasn't intentional. That's perfect timing of walking past the baby crying in a movie about a baby that gets decapitated. You couldn't even have that sound effect production design if I tried. But yeah, so for instance, there was a story not so long ago in Ireland during the summer where a man takes the child from his wife, newborn baby. She's getting dropped off at daycare or something like that to be minded. Very young baby. He forgets that the baby is in the back of the car, goes to work, only remembers by 2 p.m. that the baby's in the back, and of course the baby's just died from the heat. And how do you recover from something like that? And there's a not to say genre, but there's a to keep it movie language, there's a genre of feeling that I have, and it's when something really extreme that I don't want to deal with happens, I have this immediate thought, glad that wasn't me. Oh my God, glad that wasn't me. Where someone's on their deathbed, you hear about something horrible, or someone's just done a fuck up, like leaving their baby in the back of the car to roast to death. I always had to go straight to, I'm glad that wasn't me, because I can't comprehend even engaging with those feelings at all. Remember when I heard that story? And the other thing is, I like what you said as well, that this is from a male perspective and taps into man's fear of being a provider, being up to that role. And in a lot of cases, the duality of how a man looks after a kid as a woman would, because not getting too, I don't know if sexist is the word, but women are definitely better in general at looking after their kids. They're instinctively safer. They're instinctively closer. They're biologically closer in many ways, considering they breastfeed them and raise them, generally speaking. And there is something to that, isn't there? And I'm obviously not going to ask you directly, who do you love more, your wife or your kid? But it is an interesting question that's peripherally explored through various interactions between characters in this movie that adds to the weight and the extra subplots, if you will, of emotions, I suppose, that go on as this movie continues. So, but I do know a lot of guys would answer they love their wife more and that they did this for the wife, and it's not that they don't love their kid, but I don't think in general you can compare really how women feel. Obviously, feel free to argue with that as a dad yourself, but I just feel in general that's been true from people I've talked to. Obviously, I'm not a dad, I'm never going to have a kid. New fears unlocked in this movie, as I said. Fucking hell, I've never thought how fragile a kid is until I saw this movie and was thinking, wait, I was watching with my partner Tasha, and I was thinking, do people get told how to hold the baby? Do people get to get a breakdown of what not to do? Because it almost feels like it's impossible to keep them alive after watching this movie, and I felt really panicky of something that I wasn't even going to have. So I could just imagine you Friday night, kick back with a beer, kids to sleep, gonna watch a movie by myself. What am I gonna do here to relax? Movie that's like directly, it's almost like if somebody wrote a horror movie to freak you out, they couldn't have done a better job than this. Yeah. Whew, what an experience. And what I will say is as well, like you, when the baby initially died and we don't get to see it, I was thinking, oh, is that the extreme? Is that what you got? Is that what all you got? Is this baby essentially a MacGuffin? Incidentally, I wonder if anybody ever named their baby MacGuffin based on the baby not being relevant to their lives, but they had to have it anyway. But yeah, and then the movie slows right down. The second it goes to I think it's the wife when she's going about her business and buying her bottle of wine. And I just felt the movie slowed right down, and I thought, is the whole movie going to be until his wife shows up and this thing starts breaking down? Is the ending is she's going to find out? And I'm thinking, I don't really want to sit with this. I don't want to sit with this feeling, which hadn't even began, incidentally, at this time. But the more we spend with this guy walking around absolutely zonged, absolutely dead inside from his decision, or sorry, his mistake, not his decision, but his decision to, maybe it's not even a decision actually, but is far be it for me to say how anyone acts in grief, but like he said, he doesn't want the moment between his old life ending and his new life ending to meet for as long as possible. So we get this excruciating movie that just broadcast anxiety through one character to the audience who watched it. I've never seen a level of anxiety and empathy broadcast between the audience and a character done so well in my life. Obviously, there's movies like Uncut Gems where Adam Sandler's on a mission and you feel very anxious, but that's more the movie making you anxious. There's movies like Showing Up where Michelle Williams plays this miserable character that completely broadcasts misery from one character to the other. Sorry, from one character to the audience member. In this, I was just sitting and suffering, experiencing a morsel of what this guy was going through. And it was very hard to sit in the space in between the scenes with this character and the inevitable doom of his mistake catching up with his life. It's almost like a 4D experience of emotion, man. And I'm not even a dad. I don't even have those fears. But the same way I have that reaction in real life when there's something that's really uncomfortable for me, and my immediate thought is, glad that wasn't me. Well, I've got to sit with glad that wasn't me for about 70 minutes of him suffering. And that's the genius of the film. It managed to find a space in between the moment you do an absolutely irredeemable act, whether you meant it to or not. You probably aren't able to find redemption in yourself, and pretty sure his wife won't. Pretty sure society won't. I feel like this is the type of thing, if a woman heard about it, she would think that the guy is unforgivable. And obviously, this is generally speaking, because women expect certain things from men in terms of a role, security, safety, and being able to look after a child. So I feel like there's some relationships, obviously there's movies like this in different ways, like Force Majeure, or that other movie with, can't remember who's in it. Is it Gail Garcia? Can't remember his name, but it's in some movie that's set in Georgia when someone pulls a gun on him and his girlfriend, and he can't protect her and hides behind her, and she's pretty much turned off by him. So obviously there is this horror, if you will, of being a man that we worry about not being able to provide for our family. That's very a uniquely male thing, and movies that hit on it make us very uncomfortable, and few movies do. And this one, whew, boy does it. And like I said, I don't even have a kid, but yeah, I really like what you said, that it taps into that. I absolutely agree. Now, the other thing is, yeah, this movie's filled with, I guess, gallows humor at times and uncomfortable humor. And normally when something absolutely horrible happens or something ridiculous happens, and then a humor scene happens after that, I can separate my emotion to just laugh at the joke and separate the two incidents. In this, it feels like it's all connected, doesn't it? It feels like it's completely connected, where there's a scene where she finds out that the coffee table smashes, and the fact that the salesman said it was unbreakable, that she finds it so funny, and she's laughing manically about it, and she keeps on laughing so much that it becomes funny because someone's laughing so much about it. But the whole time you're thinking, Jesus Christ, she wouldn't be finding it that funny if she knows it's going to happen. She won't be finding it that funny later on in the movie when we get to the main part of the movie, the reveal of the movie, and it's just pull your blanket over your face and bury your head type of scenes. Yeah, my God. And the other thing about the movie is, as well, there's a movie, probably seen it, I'm pretty sure you have, Rope by Alfred Hitchcock. In the opening scene, I think there's a murder, and then they bury, well, not so much bury the body, but they hide the body under a table, I think it is. It's not exactly a table, but a chest. And all the family have dinner and more guests arrive, and there's this level of ratcheting up the tension and a kind of play on the tension in this. And that's not to say that this movie doesn't play on the tension with lots of scenes, because we do get quite a few scenes where it does play on the concept of waiting for the wife to find out in it. We have scenes where the baby monitor has a dripping sound. We get scenes like that. We get scenes where she comes home and she's knocking on the door and there's a buzz and he's ignoring her, and we don't know if she's going to get in. What's he going to do? And then she gets in the house. You're thinking, holy fuck, she gets in the house. And obviously there's a little bit of liberties taking with, I'm pretty sure she would want to see the baby, but whatever, we can put that aside because it's just a minor thing. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe she's happy with her break. Maybe she's happy with the silence. But it plays on that where, oh, I'll check on the baby. No, I'll check on the baby, the husband says instead. And there is moments like that where we get those scenes. But I think the concept itself is so nerve-wracking, and there's so much tension built around the event itself and him not reckoning with the event and it not catching up with him yet, both psychologically and emotionally maybe. That there's so much in that. The film doesn't even need to do that much with the scenes like the dripping monitor and whatnot, because we're just constantly getting it at every beat, and his trauma is beaming into my chest. It felt like someone had a boot on my chest for 90 minutes or whatever long, and it just wouldn't let up. And I'm still feel like I'm trying to shake that now. And Jesus fucking Christ. And you know, there's other things that happen on top of that as well, like the salesman coming back, kind of making maybe a pass on the Jesus character, and the little girl upstairs having a crush on him. There's all these other things as well that almost seem like they don't matter, and they're played for a bit of humor, and they're, in the case of the little girl, they're played to add an extra layer of, Jesus, the wife won't really care about this when she hears about what happens to baby. Now, what I will say as well is that the humor worked for me quite well as well, especially with the wife, and when the brother comes and his girlfriend of 18 years old, when they come to the house as well to have a little dinner. I feel like that kind of works because it allows us to, it alleviates us, maybe is the better word, from the bubble of the main character, aka the dad's emotional beam that's been put onto our chest, and allows us to see the reality of what other people are experiencing unbeknownst to, or unknown to the event, should I say, that's happened. So it is important to see the wife manically laughing. It is important to see the brother and his girlfriend having this scene where they're debating about being a vegan, and it just seems completely absurd. But it's not absurd. What's absurd is that people are living in different realities based on what's just happened. And it allowed us, even though it does seem a little bit camp is the word you used, I feel like it allows us to experience different type of emotion and gives us a break from the emotion that the main character feels by making it more heightened and absurd. Someone manically laughing, it's just giving us different types of emotions of the characters, and it stops at times the characters, the main character's emotion from totally taking everyone else's emotion, if that makes sense. We still have time to feel some of the other characters' emotions, and that's important because it adds to the fact that they obviously don't know the experience yet and their lives hasn't been ruined. And obviously how you can be in a different world thinking things are happy out, all the while something horrible has already happened. And obviously that's proved later on, where the brother finds out about the baby being killed or accidentally killed, and he starts having a breakdown as well. And very few people can handle this. And I also really like what you said as well of we see the bedroom of the little baby later on, and it's painted blue. It's got all these lovely toys in there. The dad cried when he painted the room, and we get this other side of him that we haven't really seen, because obviously we get a lot of comments about he didn't want to be a dad yet. He loves the wife more than the kid, and we just see no, he actually really did love the kid as well. But sometimes it just felt too much for me, man. I won't lie, in the sense that, you know, when they have torture porn movies like Saw, although Saw is more of a thriller, but you know, it spawned that type of genre where we're just going to sit here and we're going to watch these characters get their limbs fucking cut off, and yeah, we're going to sit with that because that's what people enjoy. I thought that this was the psychological version of torture porn. This was psychological torture porn, because the more it went on and the more things happened, I was just thinking, how much longer do I have to sit here and watch this guy be in this level of misery? How much are they going to give us of this? But the film's credit, it never felt like they were overloading it from a plot point to just over egg the goose, if that is an expression. It is now. It just felt like I could not handle anymore because we're so emotionally invested in this guy's plight that it wasn't that they were overloading suffering from a plot point of view, although a head under the fucking table or sofa or wherever it was, a girl accusing him of kissing him in the elevator, and a dog taking the head out probably was overload, but that was for the finale, so you need the finale. But up to that point, it never really felt like they were just throwing more and more on from a plot point of view to see how much we could take. It was more that we just couldn't take any more slight thing from even an emotional point of view. So yeah, very powerful movie. Now, from a filmmaking point of view, I have a few critiques. Now, all the performances and the acting was fantastic. I'm not quite sure how I felt about the directing all the time. I think there's very good scenes like where he's having the dinner and he doesn't want to eat, and we get that great insertion shot of all the blood and him spewing out blood and imagining he's eating something. So I feel like from a budgetary point of view, the filmmaker did brilliant. But I just felt like sometimes some of the blocking and some of the scenes were a little bit, could have been a little bit tighter. But if it is a lower budget movie, then I'm absolutely fine with it. And I feel like there's a few scenes where we just get fade to blacks, and a few scenes linger a little bit longer than they should, and maybe from an uninteresting angle than it could be. But again, I wouldn't be too critical of it, because what the director managed to capture in between the frame in terms of the energy and the emotion is absolutely sensational. So I wouldn't be too critical. And it could also be argued that the fade to blacks complemented the slowing down of being stuck in this moment, and how time slows down and how every minute of this feels longer than it is. And obviously the filmmaker wanted us to be stuck in the moment between the event happening and his life ultimately crumbling. So I think there's contextual reasoning for a few of the fade to blacks. That's for sure. I can't argue with that. But I just feel like it's almost like when we watched that movie by Neil LaBute where it's got Stanley Tucci, I can't remember his name, and they're in a house, and just felt like a little bit like a play at times. But I wouldn't be too critical of that, and I don't want to give the impression that in any way dampened my experience, and it's not necessarily a criticism. I just little niggle and a little side comment that I did feel that maybe it could have been a little bit more interesting shot choice, or maybe that again is prohibited by the location where you are, an actual flat, and so on. So yeah, I need the foot to be off my chest, and hopefully I'll wake up Monday morning and just have normal work anxiety to be on my mind. Hopefully you haven't bubble wrapped your kid and hopefully you can hold your children without having a panic attack. But yeah, brilliant movie. It would be interesting to ask Tasha actually her experience of what she thought the movie would be, because unfortunately sometimes she has the luxury, or non-luxury if that is a word, of me putting on a movie, her knowing nothing about it, and just dealing with the ramifications of it. So I'd love to get her thoughts. Maybe I might ask her about where she thought the movie was going based on the opening scene until we get the coffee table scene. But yeah, what a movie, what an experience.
Hey man, so yeah, I watched it late Saturday night. It's now Sunday evening. I'm not quite 24 hours removed from it, but I've definitely got that removed that you don't have yet. I'm sending this voice note, pacing up and down, carrying my 2-month-old in a baby carrier, recording this between bouts of crying. I was actually thinking, like, if he starts crying, maybe I should just leave him crying in the background of the voice note. It'd be kind of thematically on point. But yeah, it's funny, these incredibly high impact movies, and they're few and far between, where the way you think of the film can be measured by your distance to it. Like, you felt one way immediately when you watched it, you felt a different way 6 hours later, you felt a different way 24 hours later, 6 months later. Like, it's an evolving relationship, because so much of what the film does is the intensity of the viewing experience. Then you step away and maybe you're more critical of it, or maybe you respect it more when the dust settles. So I'm going through that journey, and it's great to hear your thoughts on it. I think it's quite an obscure, I mean, it's obviously become an overnight cult film, but it's not the type of film that's going to be breaking any box office records. So to get to watch it and then hear a friend talk about it in depth and have that kind of get to digest it, really, just because you know, it's a film that you want to kind of reckon with, is a privilege. So yeah, really appreciate your thoughts there on it. I've taken notes on what you said, so I'll just kind of like respond to some of the things. But just before I get into that, like, just broadly speaking, I find a lot of the time with these films that are horrible experiences, and again, I'll go back to Lars von Trier. A lot of his films horrible to watch, like just a horrible feeling. The next day or a little while later, I'm so grateful that I've seen them. I really appreciate the film, not because I'm some sort of masochist, but because it's just it's such a compliment to pay a film that it made you feel something to such an extreme extent. And that could be humor, could be Dumb and Dumber, but the feeling I got from my, you know, probably many viewings of Dumb and Dumber, but certainly the first time I watched it, that's a high compliment that you got to pay to that film. It's got you on the floor, you can't breathe, you're laughing so hard. Likewise, a film that makes you really sad, or a film that makes you really exhilarated with its action scenes or whatever, like The Raid 2, I think, is one that we both have that feeling from. So as much as it's horrible to watch it, with a little bit of remove now, the next day, just going, this weekend I got to see a film that was one of the most visceral, intense viewing experiences probably ever, but certainly that I can recall in years. Immediately before we get into the filmmaking or anything like that, that immediately just makes it a very valuable viewing experience. Anyway, getting into the nitty gritty of like the stuff that you've said about this film that's ruined your Sunday. It's funny, I watched it late on a Saturday night. So on the one hand, I'm in the bad situation because I've got no escape from it. I can't like watch it, finish up, and then head out, do something else, distract myself. Now I'm going out with friends, whatever. I'm just like, watch it, sit with it until you go to sleep and think about it as you lie in bed. And then you had the other bad experience of like, watch it first thing in the morning, and then it's just fucked up your whole day. And it's a Sunday, one of the last good weather Sundays of the year. Anyway, I also I didn't think it was going to be a Magic Coffee Table, but it felt very much like the opening scene of a Magic Coffee Table film. Didn't quite get there of like thinking that was actually going to be the case, but I was like, oh, this is so the opening scene of Gremlins or something, where it's like this ominous object that seems that, it's the movie's named after it. We're assuming it has some sort of potent place within the film. So I kind of wondered whether they were going to go a route of like, it's not that it's literally magic, it's just very vaguely within the film a sort of cursed object. And you could argue that it is, but I don't think that's really, the film doesn't explore that much, or I think that's more something that the audience would bring to it. I don't think that the filmmakers are trying to go, this coffee table was inherently evil or something like that. Although it is this big bone of contention between them. So I guess if you were one of these people who reads films purely in this kind of symbolic way, then you could say that it's cursed because it's a representation of this divide between the two of them. But anyway, that's getting a bit too subtextual for me. I think ultimately they buy a coffee table and an accident happens with the coffee table, and I don't think you need to necessarily be digging too much deeper into what the coffee table represents and all that kind of stuff. I agree with what you said about the opening scene, that it's ultimately a very valuable scene because even though it's quite long, it's actually fairly efficient in giving us that insight and that context into the dynamic between the characters. Like, it's a bit of a exposition dump, but very elegantly done, where you don't feel like you're just getting boring context. It feels like a very naturalistic dialogue scene between the characters, but it gives you, it gets you, because there's not much dialogue at home when they're building the coffee table. I mean, there's some, but I think when she leaves to go to the supermarket, most of your understanding of where they are in their life and their relationship and how he feels as an individual in the world comes from that opening scene of the sale of the coffee table. So yeah, I think it's actually like quite a pretty good scene in terms of loading the film up in that way. One thing I didn't mention in my original voice note, but was quite a torturous and brilliant part of the film, was all of these little ways, again, which feel very natural, that they make it more painful with little dialogue, just single lines or references. When she's in the supermarket and she meets an old friend and she's talking about what kind of a man he is, and she's sort of like putting on, she's representing the dynamic a little bit better than it is in real life, and there's these little tiny comments about, oh, he'll figure it out, he'll get into it more, and oh, he loves his little baby, and oh, new dad, it's always the way, and this, like, and then the friend wants to speak to him on the phone, and I can't quite remember the specific lines of dialogue, but I feel like there was just many times in the film it would put in something that's just a very natural, almost banal throwaway little sentence that people would say in the presence of the new parent, but the specific wording of it is really loaded given our knowledge of what's actually happened and what situation this guy is really in. But it didn't ever feel contrived. It didn't ever feel like they wouldn't really say that. That's stupid that they'd said that. They said it's all worked really well. And I think that sort of turning the screw and making the situation feel more and more painful was done in a very naturalistic way, which is surprising because I can totally picture this film doing things where you're like, come on. It's almost like they know that what's happened and they're deliberately choosing the worst comments they could say and stuff like that. Even like the thing of like holding up the baby's face beside the father's head, which is one of the most extreme things that happens in the movie, but you buy it. Like, I mean, I know, having gone through it a couple of times, this is the type of stuff that just happens. So yeah, I appreciated all of that. It's not a simple like the baby's dead, just think about that for an hour. It's like, no, we're going to constantly pepper in things, specific things that make it feel more difficult. Hang on, I'm going to end this voice note and get back to you in a sec. Okay, yeah, so another thing that you mentioned was the fact that had we seen the incident, we might have had a massive conversation about could it have been avoided? Did he really, the way he was positioned, was it clumsy the way he was standing? And yeah, I really don't want to have that conversation. That's so much less interesting than this film. Like, it's so much less interesting to dissect an exact posture and way that a guy turned his ankle while he was passing something. Like, that's just, unless it was, the whole point of the film was like it was made by some sort of dancer or choreographer and they were showing like how the intention behind body movement or stuff. It just, that would really not fit in with this film and what this film is trying to do. I think it was the perfect choice to not show it, whether it was forced by budget or not. It works out fantastically. You mentioned that like maybe this is almost like a horror movie tailor-made to freak me out specifically as like a father of baby and young children and stuff like that. After I watched the film, I went, as I often do, I went on Spotify, typed in the name of the movie and to have a look at what podcasts were out there on it. And there's very few. It seems to be a film that's like absolutely a cult film, but a small cult. It's not like Donnie Darko or something. This has got a small cult of people who are really into it, but it hasn't really like exploded in a media kind of way. So there isn't that many podcast episodes out there on it, but I listened to a few. And I think there's only like 3 or 4 out there. And the first 2 I listened to were both guys, I would imagine about my age, really praising the film, talking about it in very similar terms than we're talking about it in terms of the experience that it has. And then eventually both of them referenced at some point or another that they have a baby. And I wonder, I didn't know that it had anything to do with a baby, but I wonder if some of its most ardent champions out there are people with a baby, because as much as you absolutely don't want to watch this film if you have a baby, you also kind of should watch it because you're so primed for this film. To whatever extent this is a horror film, and it's debatable whether this is a horror film. Some people would say, like, what the hell are you talking about? Obviously it's a horror film. It couldn't be more of a horror film. And then other people would go, like, it's just not a horror film at all. But to whatever extent it is a horror film, it is like you couldn't find a better audience member than a man who has a baby, essentially. So yeah, that's it definitely worked on that level for me, as I've gone into detail on my previous voice note. I like what you said about how after the incident happened, the film slows right down. And I remember noticing that when I was watching it, and you just reminded me of it. And I also had that same thought of like, is this going to be the whole movie now? Like, is the next hour of me watching this movie going to take place over like 10 minutes? And it's just like, this is it. It's almost like
video art installation of like the aftermath moment sat here. And it doesn't do that, but I think that's quite brilliant. Like, when have we seen a film that takes its most intense, like crazy crescendo moment and goes, what we're going to give you from this is stillness. You're just going to sit with this for, I don't know, 7 minutes or something. It does cut back and forth with her in the supermarket buying wine and stuff like that. So you get breaks from him, but of course you're just thinking about him. And every time you go back to him, he's literally just frozen in place, as you would be. I mean, like, again, it's unfathomable what this would actually be like. It's such uncharted territory on a personal experiential level, but I have to assume if this happened to me, I would be frozen in place for a fucking long time. And it would, however long it really was, it would feel 1,000 times longer. It would feel like this is just all of reality that I know now is just this horrific moment, and I couldn't ever move beyond it. And it's one of the ways in which the film puts you in the place of that guy. And it has many tricks up its sleeve of pacing the film out and introducing characters and situations that in the specific way and at the specific times that kind of evokes the feelings that he's having and the anxieties and the suffocation that he's going through and the spaced out, like, rudderless feeling that he has. As you said yourself, like, this is a film that deeply makes you empathize with this character. I presume this event has never happened to the writers, directors, anyone involved in making the film. Such a unique situation. So everyone from the audience to the filmmakers is all kind of like trying to imagine what it would be like, but everything is working together to try and simulate that feeling and that experience as accurately as possible, I would say. Whilst also still being a film, and, you know, they have to ratchet up the tension, and, you know, it is a black comedy as well. I'm still not sure how I feel about that term, but I can't really deny that it is a black comedy because it has so many elements in it that are really only there to make it a more absurd and playful kind of situation. And that's the interesting thing about the film. And you mentioned torture porn and how this is kind of a psychological torture porn movie, which I agree with, and it's a great way of looking at it. But I was a huge fan of the new French extreme films Inside, High Tension, Martyrs, and the extreme Asian films before them, like Audition and The Grudge and Ring and all that. But when the torture porn stuff came out with, like, Saw, Hostel, all that, I didn't dig it. And I think it was because it wasn't scary. Those other genres were scary. This was, yes, there was scares. Sometimes there was scary stuff, but the fixation was not scares. The fixation was like the actual torture. So it's not like, will the girl get caught? It's the girl has been caught, and now we're going to watch 20 minutes of her fingers being pulled off or something. And I found those films often to seem quite sadistic to me. Now, I'm not necessarily leveling that accusation at the film or at the audience or at the director or whatever, but that was the feeling that I got from them a lot of the time, is that the point of watching this film is because you either enjoy this or you kind of want to see how far you can go. It's sort of like, can I handle it? Like, it's so intense or whatever. And for me, I always like the intensity married with something else, like scares, tension. In the case of like Irreversible or something, it's like profound human statements, whatever. So the difference for me with this and the torture porn movies, just in terms of assessing it as a psychological torture porn movie, is I don't feel that dirty sadisticness or sadism in this film. In other words, even though this is one of the most excruciating films I've ever seen, I don't feel like the director's fucking with me. I don't feel like the director is pranking me. I don't feel like the director is just sat in the corner rubbing his hands with glee watching me squirm and laughing. It feels like he's taking it seriously, and it is a honest to God dissection of something that really happens. You cited a case of it happening in Ireland. It obviously happens. It's terrible that it does happen, and it's really tragic and everything, but it is a part of this world. And yes, this has got its black comedy elements, but I think it's also fascinating, at least to me, and I think to you, fascinating subject matter. What would it be like to, in the blink of an eye, essentially lose everything? Not just lose your baby, but lose yourself, your wife, your life, just every single thing that you give a shit about is just gone in an instant. And on a psychological and emotional level, and on any kind of human level, what is that like? That's very, very interesting subject matter. However difficult it is, and I'm certainly not going to be like recommending this film willy-nilly. I'd probably rarely be recommending it because I just don't think many people want to experience this. But I don't think that the point of this film is to sort of, it's not a roller coaster ride of like, can you handle it, man? Like it's much more dignified, I suppose, than that. So yeah, that's and I'm there's probably people who would say that I'm sort of tarring the torture porn genre with a brush that it doesn't deserve to be tarred with, because I think, you know, that those films are popular, they have their fans. I've enjoyed some of the torture porn stuff. I just think I'm a big horror fan. It's probably my favorite genre, and torture porn is one of the major subgenres that I've lived through, that I've seen from its beginning to its kind of becoming passé, and of the ones that have kind of like popped up and become popular in my own personal lifetime, it's one that I just like was not really on the train for. Anyway, that's just, I think, an interesting distinction. It's when I'm watching extreme content, it does matter to me. Why are we doing this? Why are we here? Why are you giving me this feeling? Is it for good reason, or is it just for shits and giggles? And I think there's a lot of depth to this film, as I think you do as well. What else? I'm just going back to your notes, or my notes of some of the stuff that you mentioned in your voice note there. One thing I noted down is, again, on the black comedy side of things, there was an interesting experience I had with this film where I can identify the comedy without finding it funny. And that's obviously the case when I watch a comedy movie. I identify the comedy, I don't find it funny. If I watch Saturday Night Live or something, I identify the comedy, I don't find it funny. There's very few comedies I find funny. So it's not unusual for me to do that. But in this film, it has a bit of a different feeling, because I'm not just not finding it funny because it's not my sense of humor. I'm not finding it funny because I'm thinking the baby's dead, right? So what this taps into is, we've all been in this situation where something horrible is going on in our own personal life. We are in bits. We're, depressed and anxious and upset and angry. We've got like a whole bunch of baggage that we're carrying, but we're in a space with people who either completely don't know that we're going through that, or they don't know how heavy it's weighing on our shoulders necessarily. And so they're having the usual bants, they're having fun, and legitimately funny things are being said and are happening in our presence. Everyone's laughing. And you as a person there are going, I see that that's funny, and potentially even I see that that's even my type of funny. I see that the way that you're having bants is like, that's how we roll. I'd be normally chipping in with a little quip right now. So this is comedy existing in my space, but that's not the wavelength that I'm on right now. So that's the interesting thing about the black comedy in this. It's like featuring comedy, but not a comedy film. Do you know what I mean? So it's weird kind of dynamic to have, and again, not one that I can really think of other examples of. I'm sure it's happened here and there in a movie, but to have it sort of so prevalent throughout film is interesting. Another thing that I felt watching this was, I think, one of the most hated tropes in all of cinema, not just a personal pet hate of mine, but one that I think is maybe the most hated trope in TV and film and narrative fiction, is it was all a dream, right? In other words, you've just fucking wasted my time because everything I've seen just is irrelevant. It was a dream sequence. Whether it's a 30-second scene or a 2-hour movie, if you're telling me that none of this actually happened, then fuck you. Like, there's almost never a good justification for that device. This is the only time I can remember ever wishing that was, like, I was actually like almost praying for the ending where they go, oh, it's just going to be his anxieties about being a father and all that. She's going to go into the nursery room and go over to the cot, and she's going to pick up the baby, and the baby's going to be laughing. And it was like, I knew that wasn't going to happen, because otherwise I don't think it would be labeled with this kind of extreme, dangerous label that it has. But I almost sort of fooled myself into thinking that was an option. Not quite, but I was doing that because I was like, give me that, just give me that. Fuck up your whole movie just so that I get that little bit of like, it's gonna be okay, right? Like, please tell me it's gonna be okay. So that was an interesting experience that I had with it. And yeah, I think I've sort of covered everything that, like, you kind of landed there at the end on talking about like the directing. And I agree that the directing is a bit rough around the edges. You mentioned the fade to blacks, and it's certainly not shot in a way that it's not, you're not going, who shot this, man? I want to see more by this cinematographer. Even the director, like, as much as I think this is a brilliant film and a brilliant concept handled very, very well, I don't really have any interest in seeing more from this director, because I've just been stung too many times watching a film like this, and then next film by the director is just like giving me nothing. I mean, certainly I'll check what they do next, because if they come out with a film and I'm hearing the right things about it, then absolutely I'll watch more. But yeah, I don't know. There's the things that make this really strong, I feel, are constrained to this film specifically rather than the director. But yeah, my opinion of it is growing in the hours, or the day or so since I've finished watching it. And yeah, as I said, it's a rare privilege to get to see something like this. When it started, and I was like, I don't know, I've been almost kind of like putting it off, not quite putting it off, but just like not getting around to it, because I was like, when do I want to watch a film that's maybe going to be incredibly hard to watch? As I said, I'm getting older, I'm getting softer. And when I realized very early on that it involved a baby, I was like, I'm about to watch a baby get fucking killed here. I was like, do I watch this movie, or do I just go, no, I can't handle this movie? Like, when at a certain age, I'm going to get to the point where I'm like, I'm not watching these movies because I just can't handle them anymore. I know that'll happen. It happens to everyone. It happens to the amount of friends I have who are in like their 50s or 60s, who were like diehard Tarantino, Scorsese fans, loved their uber violent films, and now they're like, no, I'm out the game now. It's too much for me now. Like, that'll happen to me, and maybe in the early stages of this movie, I questioned whether I really wanted to spend a couple of hours with this, But now, and it's kind of like being scared to go on the roller coaster and then being exhilarated after you've been on it. But oh man, that was badass. I'm so glad I did it. It's kind of that feeling in a way now. I'm like, oh, what a film. What an absolute sledgehammer of a movie. And what a rare privilege to have a film watching experience be as intense as that. So yeah, big fan.
Yeah, no, you don't want to tap out of movies this early and become the Irish auntie, as me and my friends say. You don't want to tap out that early. You're probably gonna get into maybe Hallmark movies by your early 40s then if you follow that trajectory. So nah. But yeah, you're right. It's such a privilege as film watchers to find the movie that makes you feel something either that you felt before or that you've never felt before. It's funny that you cite Dumb and Dumber, because that's definitely one of the ultimate experiences that I had with comedy at an early age. Probably that and Father Ted with the over 75s football. But Dumb and Dumber had me rolling around in hysterics. I remember the scene where they give the blind guy the bird, and this is, I think it's a sellotape bird. And then he's talking to the news and he says, oh, they give me this birdie. Hey, birdie, or something like that. And I remember as a kid, just the concept of that was fucking hilarious. And I absolutely broke down laughing. Like, I almost couldn't catch my breath, I remember so well. And I just could not process just the idea of how funny that was. So yeah, Dumb and Dumber's got a special place in my heart as well. And it is a privilege to feel something like this as well, even though it's extreme anxiety. I've never really got that from a movie. I seldom get it from my life. So this is like a movie like Patterson, where you're just following someone around on their nice, breezy life. And this is, oh, we're just following someone around on the worst day of their life. And that's what movies are about sometimes. It's experiencing different things. That's why we love them. And I think the genius of this film, it just finds space to explore emotion and explore consequence and causality and aftermath in this incredibly unique space of time that hasn't been done in this way before, and probably could never and would never be done in this way again. And it's just something to behold. So it is very, very powerful stuff. Now, since you sent the last voice note, get off my laptop. Get off my laptop. Get off my laptop. Jesus Christ, my cat is on my laptop. Since you sent your last voice note, and obviously we came into this movie with at least some expectations of what we've watched, what we were going to watch, should I say. So I canvassed Tasha for her opinion of her journey, shall I say, and her opinion on what she thought she was watching. Because she, believe me when I say, I was sitting down watching in the morning, just having my coffee, and then she sits down, what's this movie? Which is usually a common question. And I usually give a brief description. It's about a guy that's in trouble with police. It's about a guy that's flies a plane, or I'll just give a very basic premise. And when she asked me what this movie is about, I said, I literally can't tell you. I don't really know. So I thought she was a very good person, and probably maybe one of the few people who will experience this movie completely raw, not knowing what she was about to watch, not knowing what she was about to witness, not knowing what was going to unfold. So I asked her, what was your thoughts when you started the movie? What was your thoughts when the inciting incident, shall we say, happened? And where did you think the movie was going to go after that? So it is such a great perspective to analyze and to go back to the original scene and what it would do to someone who has no idea what they're watching. When she watches lots of movies that I watch sometimes, mumblecore movies, don't think she's seen Patterson, but that's an example where we're going to follow someone around. He's a bus driver. We're going to follow someone around that has a lawnmower. We're going to follow someone around. You know, these movies where if you try and explain what they're about, it's, well, he's a postman and he delivers letters. Those type of movies that are very hard to articulate and they're very easy to experience once you watch them. It's more of an experience, fly on the wall. So she said when she was watching the opening moments and had that conversation at the coffee table, she thought it was going to be a movie, and it's not a direct quote, but something along the lines of where nothing happens. We're just going to be following around this couple on their daily life. So with that in mind, the opening scene's intention is probably to completely disarm you about what, again, very few people get to witness this movie in its experience. But when someone's writing a script, when someone's coming up with these ideas, before marketing get involved, before the trailers get involved, before a genre is sliced on your DVD or whatever the fuck exists in your Netflix category, these are decisions that are made. And we never really get these things, you and I anyway. We never really digest movies in their purest form. No one really does. So with that in mind, the opening scene completely disarms the audience because it's so mundane in many ways. It's so banal that we get to see this couple's reaction. It's very low-key bickering, very low stakes, very small, and they're just picking at each other. So then I asked her, what did you think was going to happen when he's left with the baby by himself? Did you expect anything? And bear in mind, she doesn't even know that this is a horror. She doesn't even know anything about this movie that's extreme. She's just watching a movie. And I said, did you have any idea what was going to happen with the baby? Did you have any inkling that anything was going to go wrong? And again, she said no. So I said, what do you think was going to happen when she was left by himself? And then because the first scene had set up such a low stakes thing, she thought, oh, well, you know, he's kind of a fuck up, isn't he? Very low key fuck up, forgets the screws, wants the coffee table to shit, seems a bit bumbling. So I thought he was just gonna forget to change the nappy or something. And I'm thinking, Jesus, that must have been quite the leap from thinking he's going to forget to change the nappy, or she said that most maybe bumped the baby's head slightly. And it's quite interesting to consider the stakes this movie sets out initially and what somebody who would be watching this movie in the purest form would be, what's the word, put into a false sense of security involving the stakes and what you think is going to happen in this movie. So when she saw that scene, it was absolutely shocking. You know, a low-key fuck-up, bumbling idiot. Typical dad that's, you know, fine, not particularly great, but typical caricature of a man that's not as good as the woman. Not in a political way or anything, but just that kind of feel. Then I asked her, what did you think was going to happen after that? Because obviously at this point you were totally disarmed by what you think this movie was about, and then you get to switch. And then she said that she thought the movie after that point was going to be how he loses everything, as in the wife comes back quick, discovers the body, and it's all about him slowly losing his life. You know that type of movie where someone makes a mistake and then you see this whole process of them getting interviewed by police, getting interviewed by child services, and you just see what something like this would do to your life. So the fact that the movie slows down after that. So I thought that was a very interesting perspective as somebody who would be totally blind to what they're about to watch, and how the mechanisms of things that maybe we wouldn't have thought about would have come into play for someone like that. The other thing you mentioned as well is that, what is it now? I can't remember what I was going to say. Well, I do, but I'll get on to, hopefully I'll remember the other point that you're going to say, but just in terms of the comedy and the way you said that you acknowledged that it was funny, but you probably didn't emotionally react like felt it was funny. And I like what you said, that this taps into something maybe when someone else is in a space with other people and they're cognitively in the same space, shall we say, whether they've got depression, whether they've got different things going on, so they can acknowledge things and not feel things because they're such a mess. Yeah, that's true. For me, I digested the comedy in a slightly different way. I don't know if this makes sense to you, but I digested this comedy in the most extreme version of a Ricky Gervais moment in The Office, or a Nathan Felder moment, where you're aware of something that a character isn't aware of, maybe self-aware of, or maybe unaware of something else that's happened in another scene. And they're not in on the joke, but someone in the room is in the joke. I felt like this was the most morbid showcase of that I've ever seen. So, and bear with me because this might seem a bit insane, but it's almost like the dad, Jesus, is in on the joke. The joke is that the kid died. And obviously it's not a joke, and obviously it's not funny, but he's aware of something in the same way Ricky Gervais is aware of something. Or in the same way Nathan Felder is aware of something. And the other person isn't aware of that, and they're making comments thinking in relation to one thing, but they're really in relation to another. So you are cringing. So that's how the humor worked for me in this movie. I was cringing in the same type of beat to that type of joke, except it obviously wasn't funny, but it just followed the same rhythm of that type of comedy. Like the scene where that woman is laughing, the wife is laughing about the coffee table being broke, and you're just thinking, oh no, stop talking about the coffee table. Oh God. She keeps going on about it. Oh God. And it just takes on another meaning. And you're right, the way the film doesn't go out of its way to use lines of dialogue that characters wouldn't say it, and they work in conjunction with the horror of the baby dying. For instance, we hear, oh, I tried really hard to have this baby. It took me 2 years. And you're like, oh no. And then another neighbor says, "Oh, you better have a second one. You don't have much time left." And you're thinking, "Oh no." And then you're just thinking all these different things that are just innocent quips that parents say and that people say. Like when the brother and his girlfriend ask them, "Oh, who do you love more?" And then the wife is saying, "Oh, I love my child more." You're thinking, "Oh no." It just keeps on adding to that. And like you, I thought at one point, "Oh, please let this be a movie about his anxiety. Just let me off. Let me off." And you're kind of imagining a happy ending, which is very strange. And I don't know if that's because psychologically Jesus is thinking there might be a chance it's okay. I don't know. We go into a collective state of denial in the same way that he goes into a collective state of denial at times almost. And you know, the other thing I thought, I was thinking, imagine if he goes back in and the baby's head is back on and you just find out that this is some demon child that can't be fucking killed. That was also a thought I had. And the other thing as well that's so shocking about this movie is it's a mistake that leads to a consequence. For instance, I was telling the story today to Tasha that my dad once, when I was 5 or 7, maybe, I don't know, he used to have a business where he used to do signs for various businesses, and he was coming in to collect money, and I came in with him, and he just told me, "Wait by this bin in this shop called Shaw's," which is a, I don't know the best to describe it, like a Primark maybe. And I just stayed there near the bin, and then he walked out and he forgot to take me, and he went back to the car. And my mom obviously was like, "Where the fuck is Andrew?" And my dad was like, "Shit," went back in, got me, nothing happened. That's the point. He wasn't punished for it. Nothing happened. No pedo came. I was fine. So there's lots of times throughout people's lives where they make little mistakes that aren't punished. What's so scary about this is it taps into the fear of any little mistake can lead to a massive consequence, something you can't even think about. You can buy a coffee table that can have a causality that can kill your baby. There's all these things in motion. Most people aren't punished for the mistakes, but by God, sometimes you do get punished for your mistakes. That's another element to this film as well. The other thing I thought of there, just to throw away thought, I think it was budget reasons why they didn't show the baby being killed. Obviously, this is pure speculation. Sure, I might be wrong. But I also feel like that's backed up by the fact that we didn't see anyone jump off the balcony at the end as well. We get this scene at the end where it's teased that the woman is jumping off the balcony, and then we just hear at the very end that, oh, the couple both jumped off the balcony, and the brother who came to dinner now can't speak. So the fact that we don't see either of those things doesn't necessarily mean it's related to budget, doesn't necessarily mean it's related directly to creative decisions. But I do like the fact that sometimes when you've got less budget and you've got less effects and less technology to show things and go into things in a way that you gotta almost come up with storytelling ways to get your point across. And I think this directly helps the theme of this movie. We watched Anatomy of a Fall together last Halloween, and obviously by its conception you think it's going to be a true crime, but then you soon realize it's not really about solving the crime and who's guilty. It's more about how people read into answers and things like that, and it found a space to explore those things. And obviously this movie finds a space, as I said, to explore an emotion and a feeling in between these moments. And one of the most key things to allow that to happen is the omission of the baby's death on screen. So I almost champion these left field decisions sometimes, whether they be budget related or creative related. It's very good to see these decisions being made one way or the other.
Yeah, I think the most famous example that I've heard mentioned time and time again of budgetary restraints leading to a strong creative decision is when they were making Jaws, and apparently the shark looked awful. So Spielberg was like, let's just not really show it. Let's just make it the threat of the shark. And that led to, a very strong film and one of the most influential films of all time in terms of creating like the blockbuster movie. So if this was a forced decision by the budget, then it's what has made this film. I don't think this film would have its infamy. I don't think it would have the value that it has to us if it had some, because there's no way it's gonna, how good can you make that look? Let's say you had unlimited resources, so you've got like Scorsese budget. How good can you make that look and not have it be jarring? And I just think the way it's done in this film is perfect. Also, I didn't think that the fact that we don't see them jumping off the balcony or like splattered into the ground below that didn't stick out to me as being like that should have been in there. The whole thing is psychology, and you get what's happened. It's interesting hearing Tasha's journey there. Yeah, I think she's obviously sat down, thought, okay, it's going to be kind of mumblecore vibes. And then when she got the murder, she's like, okay, it's going to be, the aftermath of him, like you said, the police interview and all that stuff. And obviously she's had that, as you said, pure viewing of it with absolutely no context, which you're quite right in saying you and I almost never get when we watch movies. Although one thing I like about our relationship is you'll sometimes throw me a movie, or I'll sometimes throw you a movie and be like, just watch this. And it's a deep enough cut that the other person hasn't heard of it. We should do that more. And I think I kind of tried to do that with this one, but evidently I'd already given you some context a few months ago, apparently. Yeah, she's had that. But to be honest with you, the one thing I knew, and it's a huge thing and it's a major thing, I'm not trying to deny that, but the only thing I knew is that it was an extreme movie, like a very subversive, like intense, difficult to watch, disturbing movie, which massively colors the experience. But it is just one thing. Like, I didn't know what the subject matter, the country of origin, the duration, like could have been sci-fi, could have been anything. So granted, I did know one massive thing, and that kind of leads you to guess that maybe something's going to happen to the baby. But certainly when the baby's killed, like 20 minutes in, 15 minutes in, like pretty early in the movie, from that point on, I have no clue what's happening. And I was quite surprised that what we get is a purely psychological film. It reminds, you were talking about like the comedy, how your experience with the comedy was a bit different. I love cringe humor. Like, I love Nathan Fielder. I love Ricky Gervais. This, to me, isn't that. Like, I'm not saying it's objectively not that, but it's certainly not the way that it struck me. I think the closest, in terms of it being comedy, and I already kind of explained my feeling of like how it's like the comedy, if we're on the ride with him, then we're not laughing, right? Because yes, there's funny stuff happening, kind of with the benefit of hindsight or something, but in the moment, you're just completely caught up in the thing. It's almost like if, so one of your closest family has just died, and then someone like slips over on a banana skin in the most elaborate, like slapstick, just the funniest possible fall ever. You're not going to laugh. You're not even going to find it the tiniest bit funny, because you in that moment, even though it is just objectively funny, you in that moment are just not on that wavelength. And that's kind of where I was with this movie. But if I was just sort of taking the style of comedy of this movie and trying to compare it to something, I would be less inclined to go Ricky Gervais, Nathan Fielder, and more Todd Solondz, like films like Happiness, which are you're laughing because it's so uncomfortable. It's in such bad taste in a way. It's so inappropriate that you just have to laugh almost as a release, because you just can't believe that they fucking pushed it that far. But still, those films are much more funny and I guess feel to me more of a comedy. But it's a comedy in such a, I don't know, it's like, it's using the tools of comedy sometimes, but for tragic and dramatic ends. Like we keep going back to this thing of like, they keep on saying things that, given that the context that all of their hopes and dreams are being destroyed or have been destroyed, that thing has this sort of irony to it. So it's the rules of comedy, but it's just not funny because it's so horrific. But yeah, I guess I don't know how much more we can say about this film, because it is ultimately a very simple film, even though there's a lot to talk about in terms of your real world thing. I think it makes you think about, like you said, mistakes, chance. I always go back to like a scene in Garden State, the Zach Braff movie, that has always stuck with me over the years, where he's describing the fact that his mother was in a wheelchair because just one time he pushed her and she like stumbled backwards and tripped over a dishwasher door that happened to fall open. And I think there's also a similar scene in The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, Fincher movie, where they're talking about how Cate Blanchett ends up not being able to dance anymore because just happens to be crossing a road. And if it had been 1 minute earlier or 1 minute later, she wouldn't have done it. And I do think about that sometimes. Like, obviously, in the context of this film, I think about it with my kids, their safety, but even just like anything. I mean, you could obviously drive yourself mad thinking about this, but the little mistakes we make that don't really have consequences, like you drop your baby, but you only drop it, 3 inches onto a cushion or something, or I don't know, just little things that are like little tiny lapses in precision that you're doing throughout the day. I guess one example would be like when you trip, right? We've all tripped. I'm not talking about LSD here. I'm talking about like, you're walking along and you didn't anticipate that there would be a slightly higher part of the pavement or something, and you kind of like trip over a little bit, and it doesn't bring you down, you don't fall to the ground, but you kind of like stumble forward a little bit. Well, what if someone had, been dry, like what if a car had like passed in at that moment, or I don't know, little things where you're like, there's a very small percentage chance that this innocuous little moment could actually, as we see in this movie, destroy your entire life. And I'm certainly not an advocate for like living in a constant state of paranoia, So I don't think there's much to be gained from thinking much about these like tiny, tiny chances, but it is, it's always like quite a confronting thing when you think about the fact that like right now in this moment and at every moment we are some random event away from just the complete destruction of our life, or even, you know, it could be positive, it could be like the massive benefit of our life. I think a lot about coincidence and stuff like that. Like, you know, people always say, oh, it was such a coincidence. I went to New York on holiday, and I went to this like residential district in New York, and I walk into this small little deli, and who stood there but my teacher from school back in Ireland. And that, what a coincidence. What are the odds? Like, it's insane. And it's a crazy coincidence. But what I always think about is what if you had gone to the bar across the road instead of into the deli? Then you would have been a few meters away from your teacher in school and not known it. So we must be constantly in close proximity to crazy coincidences. You know, like people go, I just put on a Taylor Swift song in my headphones. Maybe that's a bad example because she's like the most famous artist in the world. But, you know, I just put on a song by Radiohead, and I hadn't listened to Radiohead for 6 months. But as soon as I put it on in my headphones, I turned around the corner and Tom York from Radiohead was walking down the street. It's like, well, what's probably more likely to happen is that you put Tom York on in your headphones and he's like a block or two over. So I think we're always like unknowingly quite close, not always, but we're frequently quite close to unlikely stuff happening that doesn't quite happen, because if the odds of it happening are so slow, the odds of it not quite happening must be higher, right? Presumably. But we live in ignorance of, like, we just don't think about it, and we shouldn't think about it. But yeah, this, just going back to Tasha's feeling of like, this is just a movie where nothing happens. It's just like an average day. It's just them going about their life. That is kind of what the beginning of this movie is. And the film, it is sort of about how this event could just be dropped into the most banal Wednesday afternoon. Usually when we see really dramatic stuff happen in a movie, it's in the context of a really dramatic event. Yes, someone got killed, but it was in a shootout at the top of a skyscraper while they was trying to escape after stealing a diamond or something. It's like, this is, no, just an incredibly dramatic thing can just happen, bam, straight out of nowhere. And yeah, it's one of the best examples of that in film, of just how your life can get turned upside down, to quote Will Smith. So yeah, anyway, on that note, I think we've exhausted the conversation on this movie, but whenever I watch something like this and then I'm like, I've got it out of my system, I've kind of like, I've calmed down, I'm no longer shook by it, I've kind of talked about it, digested it, I've read a bit about it, maybe I've kind of demystified it a little bit, I'm less like in the vice grip of the viewing experience. Then it starts to fade and I go back to like watching other movies and stuff. I'm like, oh, now I need to chase the dragon again. Now, when am I going to get this high? When am I going to get this? Is it going to be 3 more years or something before I get my next like absolute sledgehammer, like Jesus Christ level movie? But yeah, anyway, hopefully comes before, as you said, I'm what was it, the Irish auntie, before I'm too old and soft to take it.
Hey man, I'm just on my way to get my croissant. before I head into the office. That croissant keeps things going. It's funny because I've like got very few things to contribute after your last message, but I have a few things I want to say. I'm absolutely paranoid to take a step left, take a step right after your coincidences and the coincidences that you don't run into is even more high probability. So I'm just living out this sliding doors moment of my life now. If I'll get a croissant, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll win the lotto. Maybe a pane of glass will fall on my head. So thanks for that. I don't really want to step into your head anymore. And regarding the kind of thing where things can change in just an ordinary day, the only experience I have with that is when it was a few Christmases ago and I was just doing my work and the hot water ball exploded all over me. And obviously I was in the bathtub and I just thought to myself, wow, stuff can really go from fucking 0 to 180 no matter where you are. It was the most surrealist thing ever. Before you knew it, the ambulance has been called. People are offering to wheel you out. So yeah, I do get that feeling as well. And yeah, that's what I was trying to say with the Nathan Fielder, Ricky Gervais. Not that I think it's similar to that type of comedy, but you articulated it much better than me. But it's using the tools of comedy in that way. That's a great way to put it. But yeah, good conversation. Great to hear your thoughts on all this. I mean, to an extent, because fucking paranoid to leave the house now. You've created a fucking hermit. So yeah, have a good day. Watch your step.
Your mailbox is full. Please delete new or stored messages which you no longer need so that new messages may be received.